So once we've created our collars, we can now open the sample cut sheet application and we can begin to utilize this to generate our sample list, including our QC. So there's a number of templates that come with our plugin. We have our standard sample cut sheet. I click on this carousel, we can create cut sheets for diamond, RC, or AC. I'll utilize our RC sample cut sheet in this example. The collars that I created are for RC holes. Okay, so what we have here now is our sample cut sheet template, and we need to go through and we need to assign one or more hole IDs to the template, and as part of that we can then update our sample lists and apply one or more QC policies. So skipping back to our hole IDs, I will then select a hole or series of holes. I can choose here from the holes that I've created, the max 001 holes. I can also include holes that already have samples registered against them within the Logchief database. So I can continue sampling or update the samples that are already there as well. Okay, so I'm just going to create a series of samples for our hole from 1 through to 5. I'll add these to the selected hole list. Click OK, and this will update here. So each of these holes has a max depth of 50 meters, and I can update the max depth if I need to, but in this case it's not necessary. The center window here, the template, I'll just expand this window here and we can see a bit better, has the sample group, dataset, hole ID, from to, sample ID, QC category, etc. And this will be populated by the definition of our samples and our QC policy. So the first thing we want to do is create a sample list. So these are the individual samples that we will take for each hole. So I'll give a prefix here for the demo just of max underscore. I'll start at 0001 and we'll take a sample every meter. This will populate the central template window here, the grid, with a sample every meter, and it's a fixed interval. So we've got the sample date, the sampled by. Now these are all related to the libraries from our demo database, and if you're familiar with the MDS, the Maxwell Data Schema, these codes need to be set to active. So looking at chip samples, we'll grab Ripple original samples, and we can say they're dry, not recorded, wet, etc. Okay, so from this point here, I can actually apply, so I can generate the intervals, and it will populate the central window here, and then it moves over to the QC policy. So we can actually see here, it's created sample intervals for each of the holes, for each of the 5 holes, all the way through. So if I wasn't to apply any QC to these holes, I can click Generate Sample IDs, and if we look closely, we can see it starts at the 0001, and it's populated all the way down to 250. So that's 50 samples per hole. What I can do is I'll clear the data, so I'll reset this grid, and we'll look at applying some QC information to our holes. So we can apply duplicates, blanks, and standards, and we can choose how we would like to apply this, whether we want to apply it to the max depth for each hole, apply to particular intervals within these holes, and there's also the frequency or specified intervals for the holes as well. So if we look at applying this QC policy to the max depth of the hole. And just for example purposes, I'll set some intervals here. So we'll apply a duplicate at 20, 40. QC category. This is a filled duplicate. Sample type. Chips. Sample method. Riffle. And we can also specify to add at the end of the hole as well. Once we've populated that, then we can click to include this as well when we generate the intervals. So if we look here, I've clicked to generate the intervals and apply QC. We can see here it's actually applied the duplicates there at 20 and 40, and it's done that for each of the holes as well. Okay, so max 0004, etc. Okay, if we look at the blanks, again, we have to click to include this, and we can specify at what interval we would like to include a blank. So if I say every 25th sample, 25th, and we can specify a blank and to include that. Now the standards, we can define a number of different ways. So we can specify standard 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Or we can specify a particular interval and choose the standard ID in this way as well. So there's a couple of different ways that we can apply it. If we specify the interval, so I can say 10, we can choose from our active standard list as well. So it depends on what commodity we're chasing, so what standards we'll have. So we'll say 10 there, and do another one at 45. So we can cater for irregular intervals as well. If we were to choose something like frequency, then that would be a fixed sample interval as well for applying a QC policy. We've also got a QC policy too, so we can mix and match which policy you would like to use. So I can populate or have saved a secondary QC policy, and we can just pick that up and populate our sheet. So it doesn't matter which environment we're logging in, we can go from one or the other. I'm just sticking with QC policy 1, just for the demonstration purposes. So in this case, it'll apply these two particular standards. So I'll just clear data again and click to apply. So go through, creates the intervals, applies the QC as well. So I can see now I've got the standards inserted per hole as well. Okay. One of the neat features of the CutSheet template is that we can also change or update this form as well. So if we look at the standard ID, for example, we can select from the list any of the available or active standard codes. I can also select intervals that weren't previously included in the interval, and I can update these as either a standard or a blank, for example, or even log them as a field duplicate, and this will update within the sample cut sheet. So from here we can progress further. We can generate our sample IDs if we know them. Alternatively, we can save our template, save our grid, or we can export our grid as well to Excel if need be. And we can also utilize the import grid functionality as well if we've previously saved a workspace that we'd like to kind of carry on working with. One of the new interesting tools or new features of CutSheets that's been developed, if I look at options here, is to aid in the visualization of the QC. So we can actually apply conditional formatting, much like what you could do in Excel, to our CutSheet template. So, for example, for QC, for the sample group where it says QC here, I can change the row color. So, for example, I'll change it to yellow. Blanks, I can change to, say, blue. And standards, I can change to purple. So I click OK, and straight away it comes up with the colors. So it's just an easy way to scroll through our sample cut sheet, and keep in mind that this is actually for 5 different holes that we can sample all at one time. Of course, we could just do one hole at a time or part of a hole if required. So it's just an easy way to visualize and plan a series of samples for a number of holes straight at once. Once we've done that, if we're happy with the placement of our standards and our duplicates, we can look at generating our sample IDs. So again, this is going to be based on our predefined configuration default here. So if I click on generate sample IDs, and it's created 0001 all the way down here to 275 now. Now those additional 25 samples are due to the inclusion of our QC policies. If we're happy with that, we can go through, we can revise, and again, these are editable, so we can update any of the intervals, the QCs, the duplicates, the standards at this point in time if we need to. So we just want to check that everything's where it needs to be, that it matches our sample bags, etc. And if we're happy with that, then we have the option here to click on validate our data. So what this will do, it will validate the data within our sample cut template, sample cut sheet template here, against our Logchief database. So it will check the Logchief database to see if there's any existing sample IDs with the same data set sample ID combination. It will look at mismatching intervals or overlapping intervals and things like that. So it'll perform a bunch of those validation checks that you'd expect from within the MDS. So I click on validate here. So at this point in time, there's no errors coming up. And what we can do then is click load samples. And what it's done is it's created samples, QC, and standards. And these new tabs here have been pushed back into the Logchief database. So I can close the sample cut sheets plugin, and I can open up our sampling tab here, and clicking on any of these max 001 holes, I can see that these are now successfully within the Logchief application, and they're ready for syncing back into the master database. So just going back quickly into the sample cut sheets to give you an example of an error, I've selected max 001 again, and this is selecting a hole that's already been sampled. So I've added that to the hole selection list. And just quickly, I've pre-populated just the downhole sample list here. And the idea here, or the intention, is that I'll be able to generate my sample cut sheets. So I'll apply intervals here, and I'll generate some sample IDs. So just for the one hole, I've generated another 50 samples. And what I'll do now is just click on the validate. And just to show you that example there will be some issues coming up here. So whether the samples already exist in the database, or whether there's a sample already for that interval. So these are issues that we can address within the Logchief program first before carrying out sampling. So you want to make sure that the samples are valid within the sample cut sheet first before they'll merge into the Logchief database.